today on this point of hyperlexia because I saw it come up on a Facebook post where somebody was talking about TechnoTutor, and there was like a positive thing about TechnoTutor, just sharing about it, and then somebody was in the comments, you know, trying to disparage and discourage them from, uh, I guess, sharing about it. And they were using all kinds of arguments and trying to throw every like emotional shame thing they could possibly find at the person. One of my favorite ones is when they say, if it's actually real, it'll be backed up by science and by what do you call it? Clinical studies and all this stuff, which is laughable because there's plenty of things that have been shown to harm people that have been backed up by clinical studies and science and so forth. And science is always constantly evolving. And people laughed at people like Tesla and all kinds of other people who had ideas that were ahead of their time. I mean, look at what happened to the people like Galileo and Copernicus and so forth, right? Imagine the person going, well, if the Earth really did revolve around the sun, then it would be backed up by clinical studies and empirical data. Well, not your empirical data, but studies, and the church would have endorsed this idea. And so it's somebody who's actually reacting to something, and there's always it's easy for me to see the bias. Like if you look at the person's words, you can see the bias. People do this. This is just kind of a side topic, but something to look for, which is like I'll give you an example, an unrelated example. I saw somebody posting about how they got married recently, and they were talking about how marriage is a key point as a man in building a business and being successful and so forth. And then somebody was on there going, "Hey, don't let other people define what marriage is for you." Because one of the things the guy said, the person who made the post about marriage was saying, I used to think that marriage was just a certificate. It was just a piece of paper, right? But I realized it's a lot more than that. And it was funny because this guy came on there and he was like, don't let anyone tell you need to have a piece of paper to do something. And he's like, basically not even comprehending what the original post was about and telling the person, you define marriage the way you see it and you find that value in it. And it's about the agreement and the support and all this, which was in essence what the original poster was saying. But the reason why, and so it was funny because in a way, if you read it casually, it's sort of this person trying to teach the original poster something. And like, it was like they're defending something that wasn't even being attacked in the original post. But when you look deeper into it, the person who was doing the commenting on it, they're not married. And so they have a wife, but they're not actually married. They haven't made that physical, written, legal agreement in our society as being married. And so their bias was actually coming through of trying to, in a subtle way, tell the person, you don't really need to have the piece of paper. Even though the person was saying, well, but I'm going beyond that, right? So I'm just giving you an example to look for where somebody is defending something, but they're not saying the whole context of where their bias is coming from, and so they'll either attack or try to poke holes in something when they're just not exposing themselves. They're just trying to get you to shut up, basically. So it's kind of a side point, but I could see that happening in this post, going back to the one about TechnoTutor. It was really interesting because I guess I didn't see every comment, but I guess somebody must have said something about, one of our kids reading at a high school level. And it was funny because this person who, apparently, does research in neuroscience and has gone to Stanford or he had all these qualifications apparently, right? It was interesting because, well, actually the first thing they said was that, and it must have been in reference to something I didn't see, and in reference to probably something Bernard said, I'm assuming about TechnoTutor, or maybe it was somebody else, saying something about the physical learning faster than the mind. And this person said, these people are claiming that the physical learns faster than the brain, which isn't true. And he started to give all this data, right? And it's like, first of all, what's the difference between the physical and the brain? The brain is physical. But then the person wasn't even processing the point that wasn't what was being said. It was saying that the physical learns faster than the mind, when the mind and the brain are two separate things. And this is a neuroscientist. The neuroscientists don't know what the fuck they're doing. Like I've read, I don't think I have it on my shelf. I might have it over here somewhere. Um, I don't remember which ones I have on my shelf back here, but I have this book called Neuroscience, and I think it's like Intelligence or IQ or something like that. And it's a very recently published book going through all of the studies that have been done recently about G factor and intelligence and IQ and all these things, and all of the studies like the physical, functional mRNA, functional MRI scans and so forth, and all the things they've done to show the link between brain activity and IQ and this and that. And it's like they're so the state of neuroscience and neuroscience research is still so primitive. It's like you're measuring blood flow in certain parts of the brain when you do certain tasks, and somehow gives some evidence that IQ is somewhere in the brain. And it's like, what if your heart is also beating faster? Like, are you serious? Like, that's the best you can do. And I'm not trying to criticize neuroscience. I'm criticizing the people that act like they fucking know something because they've studied neuroscience. And it's like you can read the books on neuroscience. I've read the books. I've read the books on memory and how the brain works and all those things. The same books that you study when you study neuroscience in school. They don't know. It's like they know 1% of the whole picture. And I mean, if you talk to a neuroscientist, let's say not publicly where they're trying to protect their reputation, just talk to them. And actually, some neuroscientists are very open about it. The ones that don't have huge egos, they're like, we don't really know much. But then what's funny is people will try to use that point, the point of neuroscience, to shut you down. It's like, we don't know a lot. But they want to hold on to the point that even the little tiny bit the neuroscientist knows, nobody can know more than that. Nobody else who's not a neuroscientist can know anything. And it's like you've only studied one aspect of something, and you've already come into it prejudging and assuming something. There's an assumption that all mental activity is in the brain. It's not true. I mean, it's obviously not true with common sense, but somebody would laugh at that and be like, "Oh, ha, ha, you don't even understand neuroscience." It's like, no, I do, but even the neuroscience, the parts that they think they understand, is so limited, and it's admitted in those circles. It's just that part's never said out loud when the neuroscience is being used to try to control a conversation or a debate or something. But it's very limited in terms of what current neuroscientists actually know. And when you go back to like the 1970s when they were first even understanding what neurons are, you're like, oh my god, we don't really know a lot. Like as much as we know about computers and how they function because humans built them from the ground up, it's like they think about this. Scientists are still arguing what electricity actually is. What is magnetism? They still don't actually fundamentally know. There's still debate. Now, there are some scientists who just jump on the point of, no, we know what it is. It's this. But they've assumed the point. And, it reminds me of uh, when I took geometry in prep school. And I remember there was a certain point where you get to the parallel postulate, right? And I remember the teacher being like, okay, we can't prove the parallel postulate, right? And if I recall correctly, it's something like, you can't prove that if you draw a line and then you draw a line perpendicular to that, and then you draw a point on that line, on the perpendicular line. So you have a parallel line, and then you have a perpendicular line, and you draw a point on that perpendicular line somewhere, not on the first line. You would think it's obvious. There's only one line you can draw through that point that's parallel to the first one you drew. But you can't actually prove it within the context of Euclidean geometry. And I mean, I studied honors geometry at a very expensive prep school. And I'm not saying that like I had some advanced training. I'm just saying it wasn't like I went to some school where they were just fucking retarded. Like it was the legit curriculum of Euclidean geometry, right? Um, and and then at that point, the teacher's like, okay, so it can't be proven. People have tried to prove it. It can't be proven. I think they even can show that it can't be proven. Like, it's not just like they think it can't be proven. I think you can show it can't be. I could be wrong about that. But you can look up the parallel postulate and the history of it and so forth. And he said, okay, so we're going to continue from this point on within Euclidean geometry. And the basis of Euclidean geometry from here on out is that we're going to assume that there is only one line you can draw parallel to that first one. And based on that, certain conclusions are going to be true based on that assumption. We're going to be able to extrapolate certain things. And he made this point, there are certain geometries that don't make that assumption. And I was like, what are you talking about? There's other geometries? And if you think about it, like, so one of the things that flows from this is a triangle. So before you get to that point, you really haven't studied triangles yet in geometry until this point. Okay, so you assume this point, and then from there you talk about triangles at a certain point, and because you've made this assumption, you can show that all triangles, the sum of the three angles in any triangle in Euclidean geometry, based on this assumption about the parallel postulate, the sum of those angles is always 180. And you might think, well, that's obviously true. Like, of course, why would that not be the case? How can you have a triangle otherwise? But if you put 3 points on a sphere, and then you measure, depending on where you put them, you measure the sum of the angles between the 3 points. You draw lines on them because they're curved, obviously, in this context. It's not going to necessarily add up to 180 degrees. So triangles can have more or less or whatever it is. I think it's less than 180 degrees as the sum of their three angles if you put the 3 points on a sphere or on a different shape or whatever. So to continue with planar, well, it's not even necessarily planar, but Euclidean geometry, you have different conclusions you can draw based on this assumption you make, right? And that's a basic point. That's not even debated, okay? But it's funny, if you ask any school child what's the sum of angles in a triangle, especially if before they've actually gone to high school, they'll tell you it's 180. And you say, what if there are triangles that aren't? It's like, it's not possible. That's what I was told, right? Just like if you ask somebody, why can't you divide by zero? They say, because you get an error on your calculator. I'm like, but why can't you divide by zero? Because you can't. And they don't even know why. Because they haven't really studied algebra. They've just been told the rules, but they haven't gone into it fundamentally and actually thought about it and studied it and understood from from a very fundamental perspective, why that's the case. So just another example. So there's assumptions that we make, and based on certain assumptions, you have certain conclusions that will necessarily be drawn. So if you assume that the brain is where all memory exists and where all knowledge is stored in your body and where all learning occurs, and it's your brain, it's not anything else, then there's going to be certain conclusions you're going to draw, because you're going to think, well, this can't be possible because we've measured it in the brain and that's not happening, so this can't be true. And so there's that's just one assumption. But when you start taking the perspective of, I went to school, I have degrees, I studied science, it's like everything that's the official story that you're told in school becomes the assumptions, instead of it being evaluating it and questioning it. What you should be doing, because you weren't taught science. You were taught certain conclusions based on certain assumptions within the realm of people doing science, but you learned the conclusions. You very rarely, unless you go to MIT or somewhere like that, you very rarely, and even in those places, I mean, it's ironic because I've seen these doctors where they went to MIT and they studied engineering and so forth, and then they went to medical school and they're like, wow, it's the total opposite. I actually learned to do science at MIT. I go to medical school and they just tell me to memorize everything and you don't question anything. So that's generally what happens, is people stop questioning. They never really were taught to be able to comprehend, so they've memorized a lot. So they can tell you what Michio Kaku said in his book, or what Richard Dawkins said, or this guy said, but it's like, okay, but that's what that guy said, but he was wrong. He made an assumption. I was watching a conversation between an evolutionary biologist and somebody else, and they were talking about Richard Dawkins' book on the God delusion, I think, or one of his books. And he was talking about memes, and he made a point, because he was the guy who originated the term and the idea of memes, apparently. And he made a point in there, and then they were discussing the fact that there was a point he made, because he was the guy who came up with the idea. There was a point in there that was very clearly, obviously not correct, and I don't remember what it was. It was something to do with the similarities between genetics and memes, and something about genes that doesn't apply to memes. But Richard Dawkins initially said that it does, but that's been shown not to be true. But he was just coming up with the idea, so he's going to make mistakes. He's got certain assumptions, right? So I'm not criticizing him. It's just, the point is, if you were like, yeah, but in his book he said this, I mean, just because he said it doesn't mean it's true, right? It has to be put to the test. It has to be, and one of the basic points that you have to put to the test is just common sense. That's a basic test. So I know I'm kind of going off on all these tangents, but I always like to give a lot of context. Okay, so let me kind of go back to where I wanted to talk about, which was this point of, in that conversation I was referencing in the beginning, where, in social media, it's like it's just you're never gonna fucking generally get to the point. People are just there to argue. If someone's responding to your post, either A, they're your friend and they just want to support you, or B, you have the very rare cases where someone's like, hey, this is genuinely cool. Can you tell me more? And that happens. But by and large, the people, and they've shown this 7-to-1, people respond more to your posts or any post, generally speaking, on social media because they're angry about it. There's some strong emotion that's elicited, generally anger, fear, something negative, like 7-to-1 or something, right? This is what I've heard. And so you're going to get mostly that as what you're going to be responding to. So it's just not the best place to persuade people, generally speaking. So when I put stuff out there, my goal is not to persuade people. It's just an impulse so they see it. And then those who are impulse and really are interested, they'll go and they'll look further and they'll check it out, or they'll contact me or someone else or whatever about what I'm sharing. So I'm not there to argue with people. I used to do that, but I could see it doesn't really do anything. Sometimes I will argue just from the perspective of I know other people are watching, so they can see my response, and that's cool. So I'm not saying there's no value whatsoever, but you're not going to generally convince that person who's arguing with you, generally, because they've already made up their mind. That's why they're responding, because they're being emotional. That's why they're saying something. That's why they're attacking. That's why they're being so negative. So in any case, this guy, there was somebody on the post who was like kind of trying to come back at this Stanford person, right? This neuroscientist, brilliant, genius guy, apparently. And they were showing all these videos and points of that they had seen from us sharing about our kids, right? And it's really interesting because they posted a video of Seneca reading, and she's 3.5, and she reads pretty effectively. And she reads words out of context, meaning she's not memorizing the words in a book because she's seen it over and over. She can read the word and she can write. Like she's 3.5, she can write. She can. I don't know of any letters that she can't write, and I've seen her write words. And I mean, it's not really that impressive to me because I know it's possible. Max did the same thing. Our son Caius, who is still a baby, will end up doing the same thing too in a very similar timeline because it's just practically how it works, right? Because we understand what we're doing. We're not saying that we know what we're doing, like from the perspective of we're so great. I didn't come up with this. I didn't invent it. I just learned about it. I implemented it. I trusted it enough to implement it, and then I saw the results. And it made sense enough to me because I'm very good at not. It's like I know one thing about me is like I'm willing to question what the authority has told me. Doesn't mean I automatically throw it out because an authority told me, but I'm willing to question it. Cognitive dissonance is not that big of a problem for me, meaning I kind of like the experience of it. It's not that I search for it. It's just when it happens, I'm like, oh, cool. I'm about to learn something. I'm about to challenge some beliefs I have. And I might find out that they were true, or I might find out, they weren't. Just because you have cognitive dissonance doesn't mean the thing you have previously thought is wrong. It just means that you're starting to see that there's some conflict between what you're being told and what you previously thought. That doesn't mean what you were told is wrong. But my point is, I'm usually very open to exploring new ideas because of that, right? And I think that's a good, well, I don't think, it's a very good thing to be able to do. And if you have a high vocabulary and you trust yourself, you won't get lost in stuff just because it's challenging the authority. So it's not about you reject everything. It's like you should investigate everything that you think you know, and you should put it to the test. So we had this guy on there who was saying, first of all, there's no 5-year-old that can read at a high school level because children at 5 years old are only learning their letters and to write and to like spell their name or something like that. And it's like, dude, my 3-year-old can do that. She knows all her letters. She can read words, so obviously she knows her letters, but it's not even obviously, I'm assuming it, like we know it, we've tested her. Objectively, she knows them. Objectively, she can read. Objectively, she can write her name. She can write her brother's name. She can write words. Like she's operating beyond a 5-year-old level. So what's interesting is this parent neuroscientist, smart person. That's just what they said. What they repeated was the company line, so to speak, of what the CDC says. I don't know if that's where he got it, but literally that's what the CDC says. Children at 5 years old are starting to learn some letters. They can write their name. It's like, yes, that's the average because the children's the education is not being directed effectively. But that doesn't mean that's what's possible. This is the major problem, is because you've made certain assumptions that, okay, well, yes, our established point is that 5-year-olds are learning the letters and can start to learn to spell their names. Okay, so that's what 5-year-olds can do. Is that actually all they're capable of, or is that just the result of the environment and the education system and parenting as it is? Are they capable of more? I mean, imagine humanity as a whole. Imagine if you said all humanity is capable of is living in caves and making fires with sticks. I mean, clearly we've moved beyond that. So it is possible to to evolve, right? And so part of the issue is that we're in a state where people don't even think evolution is possible. They think evolution is only possible in technology, not in human individuals. And what I'm telling you, based on what I understand in my experience, is that you can support a child to develop a far more effective vocabulary, and you can do that at a younger age. Am I saying you should? Or you should? Yes, but do you have to? No. You could do it at a later age, but obviously there would be a consequence because there's less time where they're going to have to be able to utilize that vocabulary. You know, and parents complain about the terrible twos, and it's like, well, if your child had a more effective vocabulary, you would be able to communicate more effectively. It wouldn't be such a big deal. You're still going to go through some of that. Just as an example, and it was just interesting because one of the points that he brought up when the videos of Seneca were brought up of her reading at 3, he said, "Oh, well, she's just hyperlexic," right? And it's funny because if you look up what is hyperlexia, first of all, there's 3 types of hyperlexia, and hyperlexia 1 is simply a child reads at a young age, and they're normal, like they're a normal kid, and they just read at a young age. That's it. Hyperlexia 2 is like you start to have some your child is reading at a young age, but they're also having some issues, right? Um, for example, like autism and things like that, and they might have obsessiveness. I'm just looking through some of these things. In the hyperlexia 2, it's a part of autism, and then there's hyperlexia 3, where it's like the kids have like really severe problems, like they have auditory processing issues, all kinds of stuff, right? And what's interesting is if you were going to say that our kids were hyperlexic, they would only be able to claim that they're falling in hyperlexia 1, which is they're a neurotypical child who can read early. The problem with the hyperlexia definition, though, is that, and this is the way these definitions work, it's always usually associated with. It's never a precise definition. The actual definition of hyperlexia is a child reading earlier than expected. But then they say, usually it happens randomly, or usually it's accompanied by auditory processing issues. So it's like this assumption that it's like a disorder if your child reads early. And so one of the major barriers for those who are looking into TechnoTutor and they're coming up with this hyperlexia objection is when people, especially with people towards our kids, is like when they say, well, they're just hyperlexic. It's like, yes, okay, they are reading at a very young age. That's why it's interesting. That's why we're pointing it out. But then to say, oh, but it just happens on its own. It's the opposite of what we're saying. We're saying we have a technology. It literally supports the child to develop the ability to process words and vocabulary and symbols very effectively, and we've done it very specifically, and we've shown every step along the way, like when Max was 18 months old and be able to recognize the letters of the alphabet, upper and lowercase, and distinguish between the two. And then Seneca could do the same thing, and then with the numbers, and then with the punctuation, and then when he starts learning math, and when he starts learning to read, and all these things, we've shown the same timeline. So the odds of having two, I mean, I'm going to look it up real quick. I'm just thinking about this, like, percentage of hyperlexic. I'm gonna just see if there's any kind of data on that. It's difficult to know exactly how common hyperlexia is, but some facts among children with autism, about 6 to 14% have hyperlexia. It says approximately 84% of children with hyperlexia have autism. Okay, so how many children, let's just look at that, have autism? Okay, so let's see. I'm, 'Cause- 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 does it tell us? Is it going to tell us how many people there are? 1 in every 44 8-year-old children were estimated to have autism in 2018. Okay. What percentage of... I'm trying to find an actual just easy number. So 2.3% of 8-year-olds have autism, apparently. And 84%, and then, let's see, 6 to 14% have hyperlexia. Okay, so let's just do the math on, what was it? 2 to, where was it? What was the number? I just had it. Oh, I think it just clicked off. Okay, there it is. What percentage of children have autism? Okay, what was the number? 2.3%. Okay. So, and then it just keeps collapsing every time I change it. Okay. And then 6 to 14%. So let's do the high estimate. Okay, so 2.3. So that's 0.00. Oh, I'm sorry. 2.3 is 0.023 times, and then let's do the high estimate, 0.14 times 0.14. So I'm talking about the 100, multiply that by 100. So you're looking at 0.3% of autistic children have hyperlexia. Okay, hope you're following me with this. And that's 84% of children with hyperlexia, right? Because 84% of children with hyperlexia have autism. Okay, so we looked at all the people who have autism and what percentage of those have hyperlexia. Okay, so then you're looking at 84% of the children with hyperlexia fall into the 0.033%. So you're looking at you have 84% of children with hyperlexia have autism. So that would imply that the basically 15% who have hyperlexia don't have autism. So you're looking at 0.3%. How many children are there who have autism? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Actually, no. Let's just look at. Let's see. I can't find a number where it just tells you how many children have autism. Why doesn't it tell us that? 1 in 68 children have autism. Now it says 168. Some says 144%, 159, right? But the point is, I can't find the number for some reason, so I'm not going to finish the math on it. But think about that: 0.3% of children with autism. So that can't be. That's only 1 in 80, 1 in 80, 1 in 60, 1 in 40 children. I guess it's 8-year-olds, so it's like you have to go and parse out the data and all this stuff. Only 0.3% of them have hyperlexia, and that represents 85%, 84% of all the children with hyperlexia. So all I have to do is divide that, or multiply it times, that is 0.85. So just to make it easy, I'll just divide that by, let's just say, 5. That's an overestimate. Okay. That's about 20% though, so it makes sense. So you're looking at like less than 0.1%, right? And you could go back and check all the exact numbers, but I mean, it's in less than a 1%. No, less than 0.1%. So think about that for a second. If you had 100 people, you couldn't even find one person with hyperlexia. Does that make sense? You couldn't, if you had 1,000 people, you couldn't even find one. You would have to round it up to find that one. In 10,000 people, you'd find 6. Think about that. In 10,000 people, you'd find 6. And then we have 2 hyperlexic children. And because the person's claim is that, let me make sure I'm still recording here. Dropped off my. Because the person's claim was that our daughter was just hyperlexic, but then so was our son because he was reading at a slightly younger age, but around the same time frame as she was reading. So we would have to have two children who are both hyperlexic and not autistic by any means, like very just neurotypical children. In fact, in some senses, neuroatypical because they're more emotionally stable than the average child. So they're in like the upper percentage of emotional stability, like the opposite of autism. And so think about the odds of us having two children that are hyperlexic. Type 1, which is representing only 15% of all the children who are hyperlexic, right? Because the other ones, hyperlexia 2 and 3, are associated with autism and auditory processing disorders. So, and they didn't even talk, and I don't even know which ones are not. What percentage of hyperlexic kids, which means they just are developing reading at a very young age, are not autistic, but still have some major processing disorders and all that? Like there must be some percentage there too. So what's the percentage of hyperlexic children who are just neurotypical? Because it's at least 15%, or at most 15% rather, because they don't have autism. At most 16% technically, or less, right? 16% or less of the that's not of the children. That's of the children with hyperlexia. Okay, 16% or less are neurotypical, right? Or just not having autism, if 84% do. I know. I hope this. You can follow this. Obviously, it's a video, so you can watch it again. But I'm thinking it out as I'm talking because I didn't even look this up until now. Because to me, it's just obvious that they're not hyperlexic. I mean, I can't argue with the point that they're reading at an age beyond what's considered normal. But to me, it's normal. So just how do you define normal? Average? Is it just average? But just saying that they're reading at an age younger than the average child would read at that age doesn't mean anything in itself. It's just like, okay. It'd be like saying Serena Williams is just naturally good at tennis, right? Or Tiger Woods just naturally good at golf. But then you go and read the story, and it's like they were playing golf every day, or playing tennis every day, or they had a coach who was like teaching them and so forth, right? Like very specifically. And you might think, well, but I mean, they are just naturally gifted. And I'm like, okay, but what about the top ranked, like what about the guy who's playing tennis who's ranked number 500? Is he just naturally good too? Because you don't even know who that person is, or the person who's ranked 1,000. But they're infinitely better than the average person at tennis. And you're trying to tell me, oh, that wasn't created at all. Like they're just naturally good at it. It wasn't because of all the fucking 10 hours a day or 8 or whatever it is of practice they did since they were 3 years old or something. Like, give me a break. So the idea that the children are just hyperlexic is just a way of not actually looking deeper at, okay, what is going on? Because if you were to come and sit and be in our environment and watch the kids on Technotutor and be like, okay, let's find a word that they don't know. Okay, you go and find them and you just objectively ask them. Okay, and I know you're gonna say, well, you could tell them to pretend, and okay, what am I supposed to do? Like, it doesn't matter. If you're gonna do a clinical study about it, you're gonna have that same problem. People lying. Okay, if you just think I'm lying, well then, I mean, what can I say? I'm not lying. What would be the point? It would be far easier to promote and develop something that just fit in to the status quo, and then just do all the marketing and all that stuff around it and just impulse people to buy it, and that's actually lying. Like a fucking Coca-Cola ad that's impulsing you, or like a pharmaceutical ad that's impulsing you with emotional imagery and not really fully disclosing all of the negative points, doing it in a way where they're also playing the emotional imagery, knowing your brain will process that and not the words that are being said. That's lying. That's deceptive. What we're doing is putting it all out there. So what can I say? If you spend time around the kids, you're like, holy shit, these kids are geniuses. Like they are beyond the average. But then just to go, well, they're just hyperlexic. That's like, that'd be like if you went to someone's house and they cooked you a delicious meal, right? And they were like, hey, this is how I did it. And you're like, well, you're just good at cooking. Like, what? I'm just good at cooking? Like, no, I fucking studied and I practiced and I failed and I tried again. Like, there's a process to it. I developed this skill, right? Like, I'm like building a bookcase right now, and it's like I keep doing everything wrong, and I'm like seeing my mistakes, and I'm like, oh, okay, I cut that one too short because I didn't plan that out. Like, I'm learning it. And if someone comes along when I've made a really nice one down the road, let's say, and they're like, oh, you're just really good at doing that. I'm like, not just really good. Like, maybe there's somebody who just they were born and they were really good. I'm not saying that's impossible. You know, you can get information through genetic DNA transfer and so forth, right? Or your whatever. But that's not me. That's not my kids. My kids are not just natural readers. And we're showing people what we're doing. We're showing you how to do it so you can replicate it. Say, well, if you just went into a scientific laboratory and they did all the studies, no one wants to. No one wants to fucking do that. We've already tried that. I mean, think about this. You know what happens when you go into those places? I mean, we've talked to the PhDs and the masters and all these people. They're not even interested. You know why? You know what they say? Oh, well, your kids are just smart. Your kids are just hyperlexic. It's like, yes, but you're not investigating what's the cause of the hyperlexia. Even calling it hyperlexia makes it sound bad because the average person doesn't process what that word means. They think, oh, hyperlexia, that sounds not good. And then it's funny because I remember telling somebody one time when Max was like 3, they were some kind of they were some kind of counselor where they helped diagnose problems and so forth. And I just mentioned casually because I was tutoring their daughter at the time. Um, when Max was very young and he was like recognizing letters and stuff like that, and they were like, well, oh, no, I was like, yeah, he can already read the alphabet, he can read words and so forth. And they were like, oh, I was like, what do you mean, oh? They were like, oh, maybe he's probably hyperlexic. I'm like, you mean like he has a problem? They're like, yeah, he might have autism. I'm like, you haven't even met him, you haven't even seen, and you're just assuming. It's like the people who come through the education system are programmed. If you've studied neuroscience, if you study education, if you're in those circles, you're programmed to believe. This is one of your assumptions, going back to your parallel postulate. You're programmed to believe that if you read at a young age, it's either it has to just have happened randomly and lucky, or there's probably some problem. And so it's like imagine humanity's about to evolve, and everyone's like going around going like, hey guys, yeah, no, what you mean you can live in houses? No, dude, people live in caves. Okay, we don't live in huts. All right, we live in caves. Okay, and we hunt for our meat. We cook over the fire, and you can't have doors because caves don't have doors. So you can't build a hut with a door. That's not how it works. Oh, look at that! But look here, I just built one. Oh, you're just lucky. You're just good at living in huts. Wow, amazing. It's like, no, I'm showing you step by step how I built it, and all you have to do is do it too. But instead, you're thinking, no, I can't do that. That's not possible. So what's fascinating is it's the intelligent class, the PhDs, all these people that are actually holding humanity back because all they do, and I mean, we can go into so many areas and just look at everything that's happened in the past few years, you know, around the world, and look at how the smart people have essentially run this fucking system that we have as humanity into the ground, and it's just collapsing. And now their solution is fucking just get everybody on board with the metaverse and food collapsing, you know, and all the industries collapsing. And I mean, in business, I see it firsthand. I see all the supply chains in all these different areas, running a small hobby farm, running a business with supplies and things like you see in every area. How I mean, even trying to buy a car, you can't get one barely. The one I wanted, there was only two available the day we went to go buy a car. Like in the whole fucking like 100-mile radius around or 500-mile radius around us, right? Because of all the supply chain stuff and computer chips and metal and plastic and all these things, right? It's affecting everything. So the smart people don't know what the fuck they're doing. So if you're a distributor for Technotier, you're a parent with Technotier, you're someone looking into it, and someone says, well, Cameron and Katie's kids, they're just hyperlexic. Just laugh. Okay, just laugh and be like, what is hyperlexia? It's like when somebody tells me they have dyslexia. Okay? I mean, I'm not laughing at, oh, you have a problem. What I'm thinking is, okay, and what does that mean? Well, it means I don't read very well. Okay, and why? Well, I don't know. I mean, it's just I just have it. That'd be like if I said I have cooking disorder. What do you mean? I can't cook very well. Well, have you learned how to do it? I can't learn. I have a problem learning about cooking. What do you mean you have a problem learning about cooking? Yeah, I just always burn stuff. What do you mean? Why? Why are you burning it? Well, just every time I put on a pan, it just burns. I mean, are you checking it? Are you setting a timer? Are you focused on other things? Like what's going on? I mean, I'm just giving an analogy. I understand analogies are limited, right? But Um, I mean, what else can I say? I'm not making this to convince the Stanford person. They've already made up their mind. They've already bought in. They've already drank the Kool-Aid, right? They're already a part of the cult of mediocrity. That's the bottom line, right? What I'm here to do is to support those who are like, you know what? Like, I'm not here to tell you your child has to be a genius, okay? But what I would suggest is to look at what's the consequence of them not. If it's there available to you and it's possible, okay, maybe hypothetically they won't ever be a genius. But let's just look at it from a different perspective. If your child is able to develop the ability to process information, understand the difference between what's real and what's not real, and be able to solve problems in a way that's best for themselves and everybody else, why would that be a bad thing? Why would you want to extend the point of your child just not understanding things, not being able to read? Right? I'll tell you a funny story. We were talking the other day, and I think the kids were doing a bath or something, and the hot water ran out because they had already done a bath earlier. I don't know what the whole situation was because Katie was telling me about this. And they were talking about the water heater running out of, or maybe it was just, they were just talking about, I don't know. But they were talking about the water heater. And Katie was explaining to them that there's a tank, which has to fill up and it holds hot water and so forth. And Max was like, well, I'm going to create a water heater that doesn't have a tank, and it just heats the water when you need it. And it's going to have resistors, and he was talking about all the electronic components he would put in place to be able to heat the water as it comes in through the pipe. And Katie's like, Max, like, I don't know if it works exactly the way you're describing, but that exists, like tankless water heaters. Like, he literally just invented, from his perspective, a tankless water heater. And it's probably not I don't think it's the exact way most tankless water heaters work, but he was coming up with his own way to heat the water on demand. So he was like, I mean, who knows? Maybe it's actually a more efficient way. I don't know. But imagine him being 8 years old and really investigating it and investigating all the options and finding a better way to do it. I mean, isn't that how progress happens? And it's funny because all the people who advanced society, what were they doing when they were 8? What was Jeff Bezos doing when he was 8? What was Warren Buffett doing when he was 8? What was Elon Musk doing when they were 8? Right? They were fucking reading. Were they hyperlexic? Like, was because hyperlexia apparently is you read at a younger age than normal. Well, when you're 8 years old, you're not supposed to be developing businesses. Are they hyper businessic? Like, what? I mean, that's what Warren Buffett was doing when he was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, reading all the books on wealth, on finance, investing, business, and then going and starting businesses. So what's interesting is the smart people are there. It's like part of the design of our world is that the really, quote, smart people, the educated people, and educated in quotes mean they just have degrees, they went to school for a long time and read books that they could have just fucking read on their own. They're so dumb they need someone to tell them which books to read when they're all available, and you could read ones that are better than the ones in the teacher. How do you know that's the best one? You just fucking listen to them when all they did was teach you. That all they do is teach. They don't fucking do anything. And these people hold society at a certain level, and they say, we are so smart, we have determined that 5-year-olds should only be starting to learn some letters, starting to be able to think about writing their name. And you're like, dude, that's not what should be normal. And if you want to, and so when somebody says, but the clinical studies, blah, 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 you need to have all these studies. It's like, but they're being done by these people who are operating under the assumption that it's not a possibility. So here's the other thing. It's not going to happen in a fucking laboratory. My children would not want to sit all day in a fucking laboratory. That's why they're not going to school. So all this stuff that they're doing, they're just doing at home. From us, working with Technotutor with them and being with them and giving them opportunities to learn about things and explore and be creative and make mistakes and play. I mean, think about it. All we're doing is Technotutor with them for 30 minutes a day. And all of that is happening. So if somebody wants to say they're hyperlexic, I'm like, okay, what's your point? What's your point? Was Einstein hyperlexic? Was he hyper calculic because he was doing algebra and math and stuff whenever he was 12 years old? He was coming up with his own, according to him, his own proof of the Pythagorean theorem that he had never seen before, right? And someone said, oh yeah, I love this. Pythagoras was a cult leader. Did you know that? Someone say, oh, you're in a cult. All this stuff sounds very culty. That was another comment on that post, right? All this Technotutor stuff sounds very culty. It's like, well, which is it? Is it a cult, or is it we're lying, or is it where the kids are just hyperlexic and they just part of the infinitely small percentage of children who are both hyperlexic and not autistic or have no processing disorders, and we happen to have two of them. That'd be like giving birth to Siamese twins twice. Like, it makes zero fucking sense. So anytime you hear someone saying hyperlexic, it's the same thing whenever people say like, when I tell people I educate our kids at home, they don't go to school, right? And they say, well, how are they going to be socialized? I'm like, who fucking told you to think that? Socialized? Like, you want them to be socialist? What the fuck do you mean by that? And then you meet the kids, and they're super social. They're super outgoing. They love talking to people. They love explaining stuff. They love playing. Their favorite thing is when other people come to visit or we go visit other people because they like to play and have fun and talk. They're not shy. And they'll explain and they'll argue back with adults. When an adult says something stupid, they'll be like, that doesn't make sense. So they're also hyper conversational, apparently. So you can throw all kinds of hyper words you want and make it sound like it's some fucking medical diagnosis. But it's not going to stop us from doing what we're doing and sharing what we're doing. Right? Because at the end of the day, that's why we're doing this, is to share with other people what is actually possible. Right? If you watched this far, thank you for bearing with me through my ranting. But this is good stuff to consider. Right? Okay? So I'll see you in the next one.